Picture this. It's a Tuesday morning, just like any other. Coffee brewing, news anchors delivering the usual headlines, traffic jams forming on familiar routes. But beneath this veneer of normalcy, something sinister is stirring. The threads that hold our civilization together are beginning to fray, one by one, so slowly that most don't even notice. It doesn't start with explosions or declarations of war. It starts with whispers in government halls. Budget shortfalls that can't be hidden anymore. Currency devaluations that spiral beyond control. Critical infrastructure failing while politicians point fingers instead of finding solutions. The trust between citizens and their leaders erodes like sand through an hourglass. In this scenario, imagine a cascade of seemingly unrelated events. A massive cyber attack cripples banking systems across 3 continents. Climate disasters overwhelm emergency response capabilities. Supply chains that took decades to build collapse in weeks. Social unrest spreads faster than wildfire through social media echo chambers. And suddenly, the institutions we've relied on for stability reveal themselves to be far more fragile than anyone dared to admit. The warning signs were always there, weren't they? We just chose to look away. Month 1. The collapse doesn't happen everywhere at once. It begins in the weakest links. Small nations with unstable governments find themselves unable to maintain basic services. Power grids fail. Water treatment plants shut down. Police forces abandon their posts when paychecks stop coming. But chaos has a way of spreading. When borders become meaningless lines on maps, when refugee crises overwhelm neighboring countries, when global markets crash because entire regions become uninvestable wastelands, the contagion spreads to stronger nations. Month 3. Even the superpowers begin to buckle. Military forces, stretched too thin trying to maintain order both at home and abroad, start to fracture. Some units remain loyal to the crumbling government. Others declare allegiance to regional commanders. Many simply walk away, taking their weapons with them. The internet, that great connector of our age, becomes a double-edged sword. Information travels at light speed, but so does misinformation. Panic spreads faster than any virus ever could. Videos of empty supermarket shelves in one city cause hoarding in 1,000 others. Rumors of government secrets being leaked fuel conspiracy theories that tear communities apart from within. Currency becomes worthless paper. The stock markets don't just crash, they cease to exist entirely. Banks close their doors, not temporarily, but forever. Electronic payment systems fail, and suddenly, the cashless society we were building reveals its terrifying vulnerability. Month 6. This is when it becomes real for everyone. When the comfortable middle-class suburbs discover that their manicured lawns can't protect them from the storm that's coming. When corporate executives realize their offshore accounts mean nothing when there's no longer a functional government to protect private property. Law and order don't disappear overnight, they bleed out slowly, like a wounded animal. Police departments splinter into competing factions. Some officers try to maintain their duty to protect and serve. Others become indistinguishable from the criminals they once pursued. Courts close. Prisons open their doors, whether by design or neglect. The social contract that bound us together simply dissolves. Neighbors who once borrowed cups of sugar eye each other with suspicion. Gated communities become armed compounds. City centers transform into no man's lands where only the desperate or the predatory dare to venture. But here's what's truly terrifying: humans adapt. They always do. New rules emerge from the chaos, written not in law books but in blood and necessity. Might becomes right. The strong take what they need. The weak learn to hide or serve or die. Communities form, but they're not the communities we remember. They're tribal. Exclusive. Paranoid. They're built around shared fear rather than shared hope. Year 1. Nature abhors a vacuum, and power vacuums are no exception. As the old governments crumble completely, new powers rise to fill the void. But these aren't the democratic institutions we once knew. There's something altogether more primitive and more dangerous. In some regions, corporate entities with their own security forces become the de facto governments. They control resources, infrastructure, and information. They offer protection and stability in exchange for absolute loyalty. Your worth is determined not by your citizenship, but by your productivity and compliance. In other areas, warlords emerge from the chaos. Former military commanders, gang leaders, or simply those ruthless enough to seize control when the moment arose. They rule through fear and violence, but they provide what people desperately crave: order, even if it's a brutal order. And then there are the technological overlords. In a world where traditional communication networks have failed, whoever controls the remaining digital infrastructure wields enormous power. Artificial intelligence systems, originally designed to optimize supply chains or predict market trends, find themselves making decisions about resource allocation and population management. They're efficient. They're logical. They're utterly without human mercy. Some communities try to rebuild the old ways: democracy, rule of law, human rights. But they're islands of civilization in an ocean of chaos, constantly under threat from those who see their idealism as weakness to be exploited. The human cost becomes clear in year 2. It's not just about the millions who died in the initial chaos, it's about what the survivors have become. The social bonds that took millennia to develop can be shattered in moments of desperation. Parents abandon children they can't feed. Children turn in parents who have become liabilities. Friends betray friends for a can of food or a safe place to sleep. Love becomes a luxury that few can afford. But even in this darkness, something beautiful and terrible emerges: the discovery of who people really are when everything is stripped away. Some reveal themselves to be monsters who were always hiding behind civilized masks. Others discover reserves of courage and compassion they never knew they possessed. Small groups band together, creating new kinds of families bound not by blood but by mutual dependence. They develop their own languages, their own rituals, their own codes of honor. They're rebuilding humanity from the ground up, one careful alliance at a time. Yet trust, once broken on such a massive scale, becomes the rarest commodity of all. How do you build a society when nobody believes anyone else's promises? How do you plan for the future when survival depends on focusing only on today? Year 5. The dust has settled into new patterns. The world map has been redrawn, not by diplomats in elegant conference rooms, but by whoever could hold territory and defend it. Borders shift constantly. Populations migrate not for opportunity, but for survival. Technology hasn't disappeared, but it's been fragmented and repurposed. Solar panels power makeshift communities. Communication networks exist in isolated pockets. Medical knowledge is hoarded like treasure by those lucky enough to possess it. Education becomes purely practical. Children learn to farm, to fight, to negotiate, to hide. They grow up knowing only this new world, and their adaptation is both miraculous and heartbreaking. They create games from scavenged materials. They invent stories that help them process trauma. They're building the myths and legends that will shape whatever comes next. Some regions have found stability, even prosperity, under their new rulers. Life might be harsh, but it's predictable. Other areas remain in constant flux, battlegrounds where different factions fight for control of resources or territory. And in the spaces between, in the abandoned cities and empty countryside, something else is taking root. Not human society as we knew it, but something entirely new. Maybe it's better. Maybe it's worse. Maybe it's simply different. A decade later, would you recognize this world? Would you recognize yourself? The old debates about politics and economics seem quaint now. Democracy, capitalism, socialism, these were luxuries of abundance. Now there are only 2 questions that matter: who has power? And what are they willing to do to keep it? Some survivors speak of rebuilding the old world, but their children look at them with confusion. Why would anyone want to recreate the system that led to this collapse? They're building something new, something their elders can't quite understand. Technology advances in strange directions. Without regulatory oversight, without ethical committees, without the slow pace of democratic decision-making, innovation happens faster but with terrifying unpredictability. Genetic modification becomes commonplace. Artificial intelligence evolves without human oversight. The line between human and machine begins to blur. And always, there's the question: could it happen again? Are the new systems any more stable than the old ones? Or are we simply in the quiet period before the next collapse, the next transformation, the next evolution of human civilization? Here's the most chilling part of this thought experiment: it doesn't require alien invasion or nuclear war or asteroid impact. It doesn't need any external threat at all. Every element of this scenario exists in our world today. The cyber vulnerabilities. The supply chain dependencies. The social divisions. The environmental pressures. The economic inequalities. We're not separated from this reality by some vast impossible gulf. We're separated by time, and by the faith that our institutions will continue to function as they always have. But what if they don't? What if the center cannot hold? What if nothing can stop what's coming? The survivors of this imagined collapse would tell you that it wasn't the end of the world, just the end of the world as they knew it. Humanity would continue, but transformed, adapted to new realities in ways both beautiful and terrifying. They'd tell you that civilization isn't a permanent achievement, it's a daily choice that entire populations make together. And when enough people stop making that choice, either through malice or desperation or simple exhaustion, the whole structure comes tumbling down faster than anyone thought possible. They'd warn you that the signs are always there, for those willing to see them. The growing distrust in institutions. The increasing polarization. The fragility of systems we take for granted. The rising frequency of what we call unprecedented events. And in their darkest moments, looking back at the world they lost, they'd ask themselves the question that haunts every survivor of collapse: could we have prevented it? Were their paths not taken, warnings not heeded, chances not grasped, or was it inevitable all along, written into the very DNA of complex civilizations that grow too big, too complicated, too dependent on maintaining the delicate balance between competing forces that never wanted to be balanced in the first place? In this imagined future, as communities gather around fires built from the remnants of the old world, as children fall asleep to stories of cities that touch the sky and networks that span the globe, as the survivors build something new from something lost, the real question is, would you survive?